We just saw Nvidia take a pretty big hit on Friday, and we saw the rest of the market also get hit pretty hard. The question is this a little bit of a sell-off before earnings, or is there a big concern overall in the semiconductor space? Because you were at the edge of a breakout to push back into all-time highs, and ultimately it appears you failed. The next thing we'll be going into is these overall semiconductors like AMD, Broadcom, etc. But then ultimately what's happening with Supermicrocomputer, SMCI, going into February 25th, because this could be a catastrophic event for the company, and we really could see these guys drop over 50% in actual value in a matter of a week if things go bad on the 25th. So let's not waste time. Let's get to work. The first thing we're talking about here is Nvidia. It's probably why you came to the video. And again, when we look at Nvidia, you saw a really nice push up towards 141, and this was our big overall resistance. Now, I'm going to go more into fundamental viewpoints of what's happening here, but it's important that we understand where you were at here on the chart for Nvidia. Overall, you can see you had your June high back here. This was your previous all-time high from 2024. And obviously you made a high here back in November when Trump was elected. But again, that's been a really big point there, around $140.7. And you can see if we go like to the 2-hour chart, you basically sat here from essentially Tuesday, basically all last week at that resistance, and then ultimately failing near the end of the week. Now, again, in yesterday's video, I go more into what happened and the kind of FUD that was being spread yesterday and why the market as a whole took a hit. So we really need to get more information, but it's worth mentioning you are below your 100 daily moving average, which was a pain to get back above. You sat there for essentially from the 7th until basically the 14th until you eventually broke above that. So basically a week. And so now you're back below that level. And if you start to remain below the 100 SMA, it's a very big possibility you come back into 129, possibly even 126. But let's talk about what's happening right now and why this week for Nvidia is so key. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is what's happening overall with DeepSeek and what's happening there. So DeepSeek, if you don't remember, last month, basically middle of January, they came out and said we can do everything for very cheap when in regards to using NVIDIA's chips. It doesn't require that much effort. People are overspending. These companies are overspending. Now, we were lucky enough to have Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, discuss exactly what's going on and discuss the fear of and concern of what's happening there as well. So he goes into a pretty long, I was going to bring up the video, but I'd rather just go over specifically what he said. But he basically says, models are incredibly exciting, but investors got it wrong, assuming it would be a negative for his company in the AI industry. Now, what he said is basically it's split up into two different parts when we look at AI trading overall. So Huang said there's basically two layers of what's happening here. You have pre-trading because we want to have a foundation in order to get to the second part, which is post-trading. Post-trading is going to continue to be very important. Huang said the second layer is the most important, which is post-trading. This is where you learn to solve problems. Now, again, I'm not an AI specialist. I don't use their product to go over all of this, but he gives you a better understanding of what's happening there. The CEO said people got worried and said, oh my gosh, pre-training is a lot less expensive. They forgot that post-training is quite extensive and intensive. He has said that the third scaling law is that the most reasoning you can do before answering a question, the better. Reasoning is a fairly compute-intensive part of it, he said. Overall, Huang points to the stock market responded to DeepSeek's R1 as, oh my gosh, AI is finished. It's exactly the opposite. Now, a few things that I want to say about this. Now, number one, it's also important that DeepSeek is having an open source, I believe, next week, going over 5 different models they're working on, basically going over their work more intensively. And again, you guys already know that I don't really care about what DeepSeek is doing. Number one, because they're Chinese-based. Number two, because they're already getting banned from the U.S. government. And then number three, I think they're just going to get more and more regulation strapped onto them. And until we can see a more, again, call me whatever you want, but I would like to see an American-based company or even a company based out of Europe come out and, say the same thing that they're saying, right? But we'll see. But the one thing that I will add on to this, and we'll go into this here in a second, is what Jensen is saying, in theory, checks out. Why does this check out? Because we just had earnings from Google. We just had earnings from Amazon. We just had earnings from Meta. We had earnings from Microsoft. We had earnings from Tesla. We had earnings from Apple. And they all said they're going to spend more money quarter over quarter compared to last year going into AI research, development, etc. It didn't slow down. Even Baba, which is working with Apple on their AI, is basically saying the same thing. And again, it lines up with what Jensen is saying here. that DeepSeek painted a picture that isn't necessarily completely true. And so again, why would you have these billion-dollar companies, trillion-dollar companies as well, wanting to spend more money here when there's a cheaper alternative and they can make margins more efficient and make more money every single earnings call and really prop up their stock value even more? That's something that you have to think about. And again, I think you have to think about things from both lenses and both sides so you can get an unbiased viewpoint of what's happening overall in the market. So really interesting what's happening here. It's also worth mentioning Nvidia's earnings are in the 26th, so we'll really get a better viewpoint of how much money they're making, are they growing, and ultimately can they reach their $40 billion quarter revenue, right? That's what I really want to see from these guys. If you've seen the overall growth, we know you go a year ago, April, you had basically 25 billion, 28 billion, 33 billion, and now we're projected to have 38 billion. So if we can get closer to 40 billion, that'd be awesome. We'll see what happens there overall. But again, the next thing I did want to go into is what DeepSeek is doing here. So again, you can actually go into this, I believe from TechCrunch. It basically is the same article about what Jensen was saying. But it goes down here. Meanwhile, DeepSeek announced on Thursday it plans to do an open source 5 code repositories of an open source week coming into this coming week. Okay, which is funny that they timed it during Nvidia's earnings. So this could be bad. This, in theory, could be bad if they continue to push this overall narrative. So we'll see what happens here, and we'll get more information about what they're doing and how they're doing it. But again, it is worth mentioning as well. Like they said they were able to make a product. They said they were able to use a product, and they said it was efficient with, a tenth of the spend of all these other companies. Then the product crashed. So again, it's just like, who do you want to choose to believe here? Again, one company versus the Mag 7 spending more money every single quarter. But again, we'll get more information there as well. Very important. I will be looking at this. But nevertheless, you're still seeing a dip overall on Nvidia. The other thing I'll add in here is going into Nvidia earnings, I prefer to see a little bit of a dip rather than seeing a pump straight up on the stock. Typically, when you move up too much before the earnings on Nvidia, you don't get too much. And I will say the previous few earnings, we kind of had no movement, even with good overall reports. So worth mentioning, literally you get a downside and then you buy the dip and you make money. So that's traditionally what's been happening over the past few earnings calls on Nvidia. But still, like the stock, we'll see what happens here. And I definitely think it's going to be interesting. It's also worth mentioning you have been making lower highs still since January 6th, since the year started. And again, you're still kind of following that trend and you're underneath 140.7. But the second you can remount this level here, I will say I am very, very bullish. And I could see this thing pushing back into all-time highs, ultimately for myself. Now, the other thing here too is looking at other semiconductor names like AMD as well. And I think AMD, again, I've been saying this, when we look at AMD, there's nothing to necessarily get excited about. There's no news surrounding it either. I went over in the last video of AMD saying the bull bear thesis of what's happening here. But again, there's no area in which AMD is thriving. Yeah, their data centers are growing, but they're growing slower than basically everyone in the long run of things. So it's really important to understand that as well. That's why when you look at AMD stock and you zoom out, and again, we can go to a daily 4-hour chart, whatever you want to look at, you're clearly still in a downtrend, whereas you have AVGO. Even though AVGO got a lot of weakness, Broadcom, you're still relatively at highs operating there. I mean, you even had more buy side happening on Intel as of recently, and I couldn't tell you anything Intel's done other than getting bought out by potentially AVGO and TSM as far as the manufacturing of their chips. So again, when you go back into AMD, very, very, very weak. You're literally back at levels from 2021, and you're back at highs ultimately from 2021 in January, right before when Biden kind of got into office there as well. So important to think about what's happening here and really how weak you do overall look. AMD is still tracking to the downside. If you can start getting back above 117, 118, I could get behind maybe going long. But here, again, I've said it plenty of times, the buy zone is still about $99 to $97. Until then, you have to be very concerned. If you break $93, this thing looks really, really weak overall. That's really the same place that AMD has been. There's been no update. There's been no change. Revenue slightly upticked, but I mean, what are we talking about? It's still making under I think under $10 billion overall quarter. Not really what you want to see. Again, there's no really big change here. It's been the same story for the past 3 to 4 years on the stock. So I don't know what we're talking about. Every other company is growing rapidly in the space, and they are not. And the other thing to think about here for everyone saying, well, it's steady, it's good, they're undervalued, whatever. What do you think is going to happen? Again, we saw Nvidia dip here on the day from 140 down to 134, which let me say that was a decent sized dip here on the day. But what do you think is going to happen to AMD? Nvidia is still pretty far off from its local lows on the year. Look how close AMD is. Look how close AMD is to breaking those lows. Again, underperformers will underperform the best movers as well, even when they go to the downside. So weak, and not what I want to see overall there. The rest of the semiconductor space, again, you're breaking back down below 256. You're back at your 100 and 200 SMA. We'll see what happens coming into the beginning of the week. But overall, not looking too confident to start the week. But I do like this going into NVIDIA's earnings, like I mentioned. The last thing I want to talk about was what's happening here with SMCI. So SMCI, you guys have been asking a lot about this. We've been tracking it quite a bit. Now, a few things we've talked about here on the stock with SMCI is you coming into your resistance of $90 or $67. And again, giving you a visual of why that level is so key. Again, you can see when you peaked out here around $124, you came back down, made a swing low right here, bounced up, and then eventually you lost that level and then you died. So $67 has been a pretty big line in the sand. Now, SMCI, again, people keep kind of trying to come here and comment like, well, they already got delisted from the NASDAQ. No, they did not. No, they did not. Okay, it was threatened. They were not delisted yet. So worth mentioning. Okay, again, so February 25th. What is today? Today is the 22nd. So February 25th is Tuesday, I believe. It is Tuesday. So Tuesday, they have to submit their paperwork for the 10K, 10Q filing, basically all their financials, everything like that. Now, again, I've seen people's comments bearish. I've seen people's comments on the channel bullish for the stock. I am not here to take a bias. What I have been saying, though, is as you get closer to this date, I would be out of positions. It is a lot of risk. It's a lot of unnecessary risk, and I don't think the reward opportunity is that great, especially to the upside at this point. I will say, if this goes bad, I don't see how the stock stays above $30. I think this thing gets absolutely destroyed. So very, 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 very important, right? So again, and you're seeing the market's assumption is that everything gets filed according to a Wedbush analyst, Matt Bryson. That's largely baked into the stock at this time, which is why you've literally seen a run from $27 from the 3rd of February into highs of $67. So again, that's what I'm saying. I think the upside has kind of been limited. And again, if this comes out bad, you will get destroyed. It will get hit. It will be very, very, very bad. Now, you're seeing SMCI saying that they're working diligently to get their filing and their reports done. Now, do you trust any company that really says we're working diligently? And this report was supposed to be filed back in August of 2024. I don't know if I would really believe them. So again, you can choose to do what you want to do, but I think this is extremely, extremely, extremely risky, especially on the long side of things. If anything makes sense, I will say a little bit of a gamble to the downside makes the most sense on SMCI. This is the first time that I've mentioned a downside trade for SMCI, but as of right now, it makes more and more sense, especially with the weakness overall. If by some chance they report it, again, you take the L. You flip your bias, you try to aim long because, again, their outlook and what they've said their outlook is for their next year of revenue coming in looks pretty good. They're one of the only companies that is seeming to be following the great, fantastic growth of NVIDIA and AVGO Broadcom when it comes to what's happening with this space as well. So, again, very important to be using this. They were in talks of working with Tesla, too. With all their data centers and what they're going to be doing there as well. So this is interesting. It's exciting, but I would not blindly be going into this. I definitely think it's very important that you keep your head on a swivel as well here. No earnings, but again, this is probably bigger than the earnings, to be totally honest to you. So again, I'd be watching SMCI like a hawk here. Now, again, those are the biggest things that I've covered. When we look at what's happening with SPY, before I let you out of here as well, SPY is coming back down to key levels, holding support in your November 11th, November 8th highs. You get below this, you're probably coming down towards 596, 592, your 100 SMA there. You go look at QQQ, which is definitely more important towards semiconductors. You're really holding up here. You're still in December levels. Again, November 11th, November 8th highs to be on par with SPY or down here at 516. So you're definitely lagging so far on NASDAQ. But again, you still had a very big drop overall here on Qs, down over 2.8%, 0.08% on a Friday. And I think you could still see some more downside. You look at NASDAQ futures, they were down around 700 points overall to the downside from highs as well. So across the board, very concerning of where you saw this happen, but definitely what I'm looking for right now moving into the beginning of this market and week as well. If you guys are interested as well, this is our Discord. Our link is down below. You get access to all of our trades, what we're getting into. Last week, one of our biggest trades was Baba. One of our losses at the end of the week was Celsius. I did want to go back into Celsius. I think I took like an 8% loss, but for transparency's sake. But the biggest trade of the week last week was obviously Alibaba. We continue to buy more and more of these contracts on the dips, but again, they continue to print as well. So if you have questions, comment down below. If you want to see all of our trades, everything that we're doing throughout the week, all the chart setups that we're watching as well for scalping, day trading, swing trading, etc., it's all down below as well. I'll see you guys next time. Follow on Twitter. And again, another video coming out later.